A common assumption about creatine is that it's primarily for athletes in a caloric surplus diet, that building muscle and gaining strength requires you to be eating more than you're burning. The relationship between creatine and caloric restriction is more interesting and more context specific than that assumption. First, the direct question: does creatine work when you're in a caloric deficit? Yes, with some important qualifications. Creatine's core mechanism, providing more phosphocreatine for rapid ATP regeneration, operates regardless of caloric status. Your muscles store and use creatine whether you're gaining, maintaining, or losing. The performance benefits of full creatine saturation: more reps before failure, faster interset recovery, better power output are present in caloric restriction just as they are in a surplus. In fact, for individuals in a caloric deficit, creatine's performance benefits may be proportionally more valuable. When training in a deficit, maintaining training intensity is harder than it would be in a surplus. The hormonal environment is less anabolic, energy availability is lower, and recovery is slower. Having a full phosphocreatine reservoir doesn't fix any of these systemic constraints, but it does ensure that the energy system you're drawing on during intense effort is operating at capacity rather than being further compromised by low creatine stores. There's also a meaningful muscle preservation argument. When in a caloric deficit, the body is at greater risk of catabolizing muscle tissue for energy, particularly in the absence of adequate protein intake and training stimulus. Creatine supplementation, even in a deficit, has been shown in several studies to reduce the loss of lean mass compared to placebo during periods of caloric restriction combined with resistance training. Part of the mechanism is cell volumization. The maintained intracellular hydration signals an anabolic environment even when systemic caloric availability is low. The other part is training quality. Creatine allows a more effective training stimulus to be maintained in a deficit, which is a more powerful muscle preservation signal than lower quality training. One context specific worth noting: the intramuscular water from creatine adds approximately 1 to 3 kilograms to your scale weight. This can make fat loss progress appear slower on the scale than it actually is during a cutting phase. Body composition changes are better tracked by measuring body fat percentage, circumferences, or photos, rather than scale weight alone when creatine is in play. The scale increase from creatine is not fat, but if you're not aware of it, it can create false discouragement during a deficit. The practical recommendation: there is no phase of your training year where creatine supplementation is contraindicated for healthy individuals. Bulking, maintaining, cutting. The mechanism is beneficial across all three contexts. Keep the dose at 3 to 5 grams per day throughout, and let creatine do what it does in whichever caloric environment you're working in. The interaction between creatine and lean mass preservation during caloric restriction has been studied in several specific populations, and the results are consistent enough to draw practical conclusions. In older adults undergoing intentional weight loss, creatine supplementation combined with resistance training preserves more lean mass than resistance training alone. A finding replicated across multiple independent research groups. In younger athletic populations during cutting phases, creatine similarly attenuates the lean mass losses that accompany caloric restriction. The absolute magnitude of the effect is smaller than in older adults, because muscle loss during a moderate deficit in a well-trained, protein-sufficient young adult is already relatively limited. The mechanism here is not dramatically different from the mechanisms operating during a surplus. Cell volumization still provides anabolic signals through mTOR. Satellite cells are still activated by training and by the osmotic environment. The phosphocreatine buffer still allows higher training quality, which is a stronger muscle-preserving stimulus than lower-quality training in a deficit. And the modest anti-catabolic effect of maintained phosphocreatine on muscle protein breakdown still operates. What changes in a deficit is the hormonal and nutritional environment. Lower insulin signaling, lower IGF-1, higher cortisol, potentially reduced protein synthesis rates. Creatine doesn't reverse these deficit-induced changes, but it preserves the training quality and anabolic signaling that partly counteract them, which is why the net lean mass outcome is consistently better with supplementation than without, even in a caloric deficit. The phosphocreatine system operates the same regardless of energy balance.